In Daniel chapter 6 verses 19 to 22 it says, "In the morning at break of day the king arose and went in haste to the den of lions. When he came to the den, he called to Daniel with a sorrowful voice, and Daniel said to the king, O king, live forever. My God has sent his angel and shut the mouths of the lions, so that they may not harm me, because innocence has been found in me before him, and against you, O king, I have committed no offense." Daniel had become an older man who had served God faithfully all his life, and his character was known to King Darius. Here we have the story of Daniel in the lion's den, a story marked by great trust in a faithful God who is able to deliver from death those who trust in him. Just as Daniel's story provided encouragement to the exiles of the time, the gospel of Jesus also provides hope to the exiles here in this fallen world. We can maintain our confidence despite the hardships of life. Daniel stood out above all the other presidents and satraps because the Lord was with him. The king planned to put him in charge of the whole kingdom. Then the presidents and satraps tried to find cause for complaint against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find no cause for complaint or fault, because he was faithful and no error or fault was found in him. So these men said, "We will find no cause for complaint against this Daniel, unless we find him in connection with the law of his God." They go to the king and have a suggestion that he make a law that, for a period of 30 days, no one should pray to anyone except him, the king. And they urge him to sanction the interdict and sign the deed, so that it will not be changed, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be revoked. Once this has happened, they go and find that Daniel is still doing what he has always done, that is, praying to the God of heaven, thus putting himself in direct violation of the law of the land because he was in submission to God's law. They then say to the king, "You created a decree, didn't you?" He said yes. "You know it's irrevocable?" He said yes. They said, "Well, we actually found Daniel in violation of it." When the king heard these words, he was very distressed and decided to release Daniel. But because of the decree he could do nothing, even though he was king. Then the king gave the command, and Daniel was brought and thrown into the den of lions. The king declared to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve continually, deliver you." This happened about 70 years into the captivity. There was a temptation for these exiles to simply give up any thought of Jerusalem, perhaps even to give up any real thought of loyalty to God and their ancestors. Perhaps for them it would be better to simply fit into the flow of the new culture, saying, "After all, a return to Jerusalem seems to be a distant dream for us now." They knew that not only had Jerusalem been razed to the ground, but the temple had been destroyed, and therefore all emblems of the reality of God's power and presence had been eradicated in that place. If they were tempted in this way, when they began to think that perhaps it was all over, then they read about this incredible event that we read about in chapter 5 of this book. The Babylonian Empire was brought to an end. What was thought to be an eternal kingdom had collapsed and another one had been established. Now in this Medo-Persian kingdom, Daniel is faced with the reality of another king and the malevolence of those who claim to be his friends. The opening verses of the chapter simply make clear to us the logistics, if you will, of Darius' approach to his kingdom. He employs a political structure that allows him to ensure that all the revenue and support that should come his way reaches him. And the 120 are then accountable to the 3, and he has set out in his heart to ensure that one of the 3 actually becomes, if you like, the prime minister or the president. Daniel, who many years ago had been snatched from the safety of his home, is now a much older man, and here he is, his accent probably indistinguishable from those around him. His family would inevitably have blended into society in many ways. He had served with Belshazzar, he had served with Nebuchadnezzar, and now with Darius. And it is in this context that we discover that Daniel maintained the same conviction that marked his early years. His faith and trust in God did not diminish with the passage of time. Someone wrote, "We've passed middle age, but now we have to see if we're going to make it past the final 50 meters. Many of us have less in front of us than behind us, and that's the challenge." And that, I think, is Daniel's great encouragement. This helps us to understand that no matter how much time passes, even if there are geopolitical changes, God remains the same. He gives us victory despite the lions. Daniel stood out above his peers. He was a good guy. He was obviously an exceptional character. Although his friends were envious of him, they really found no basis for any kind of complaint about his conduct of life. He had shown over time that he had the capacity to face difficulties, had overcome the explanation of dreams, had a supernatural wisdom that made him sought after, and was a man of integrity. He was, so to speak, a stable man in an unstable world, a pure man in a dirty world, a man of integrity in a dark world. There was no gap between his public life and his private life. He didn't cheat at work and he didn't cheat at home. There's a lot to be said for that. Daniel's integrity was the main reason for his enemies' jealousy. You see, there's nothing worse than a really punctual member of your team if you're always late. He was respectful, kind, honest, and so on. And so people who want to try to discredit him realize very quickly that they won't be able to do so on the basis of these things. And so, from verses 6 to 9, we have the record of them persuading this king to issue an edict that would be relatively short. It was for 30 days, you'll notice in verse 7, whoever petitions any god or man for 30 days. In other words, it would be short enough for them to deal with and yet long enough for them to have time to arrest Daniel, thus preventing him from rising to the position of influence that the king had planned. Now, this is the usual sort of thing. They enter in numbers, they enter with the safety of their companions and announce the fact that everyone agrees with it. If the king had been paying attention, he would have realized that Daniel's name was missing from the list. No real cause for resentment. There was really no basis for spite or hatred of Daniel's companions. Daniel hadn't plotted against them or even been rude to them. They could probably have tolerated it or identified with it. What they couldn't deal with was his unwavering commitment to his God. This unshakable conviction in a living God, an eternal God, was beyond the comprehension of these men. It's not that these men were irreligious and Daniel was religious. They had their own form of religiosity. They couldn't deal with the fact that, when they saw Daniel kneel down and turn his face towards Jerusalem, he wasn't simply going through some kind of external religious exercise. He was declaring the fact that his conviction was that the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was the final truth and left no room for believing that all these other religions were equally valid. That's what they couldn't stand. The same happened in the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was perfectly happy to include Christianity in the pantheon of gods. What it couldn't stand was the conviction that Jesus Christ reigned supreme over all false gods. Therefore, they said, we will send you to the lions, or we will cover you with tar, and we will stick you upside down in the ground and set you on fire if you maintain this conviction. Daniel is challenged to maintain his convictions about God, in an environment where the law of the land and the law of God were in direct conflict with each other. Direct conflict. And when that direct conflict comes, we will discover who is committed to God's law, to God's word, and who is prepared to compromise and give up. This remains the challenge in our day. Pluralism will ultimately only accept other pluralists. Pluralism can't deal with that. That's why Jesus, in the Sermon on the Mount, says, "Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me." Only by maintaining our convictions about the Lord will we be able to row against the tide. They conspired against Daniel not because he was a bad guy, but because he defended the truth. He loved what God loved and he lived that love. How have we dealt with the opposition of this world? Lord, help us to keep our trust in you, even as the years go by. We want to have the disposition of Caleb, who said, "And even today I am as strong as the day Moses sent me. What was my strength then? Such is my strength now. Help us to remain in your truth, even in the face of opposition."